Chapter 1. 104. Mr. Z. 1 pocket, 2 pockets, 3 pockets. Klein soon found a bloodstained wallet, a Deweyville library card, 2 pairs of brass keys, an unstuffed smoking pipe, a sheathed dagger, and a few letters that were folded neatly. Laying everything onto the ground except for the letters, he stood up straight and looked at the wallet. He confirmed that there were only 10 plus solely and some copper pennies. The craftsmanship of the wallet is quite exquisite. It's such a pity. Klein sighed, feeling a little distracted. If I didn't spend so much of my private stash of money, buying a wallet would have been on my schedule today. After shaking his head, Klein opened the letters and quickly scanned through them. Dear Mr. Z, please allow me to defend myself. When Hornis and I sold off the Antigonous family's notebook, it wasn't stupidity or betrayal. It didn't appear special in any way when it was in our hands. I suspect that it's alive and that it's a wicked item armed with a certain life and wisdom. It was something dangerous that needed to be sealed. At different stages and before different people, it shows different contents. This is a proven fact that I've learnt from the lamb in the police station. Although the notebook shows content that is sufficiently true each time with plenty of evidence, I believe that it would only reveal the completed content in the hands of a descendant of the Antigonous family. When Hornis and I received it, we could only see some trivial matters of the Antigonous family, the general situation of the nation of the Evernight on the main peak of the Hornis Mountain Range, and also the 3 sequence potion formulas we handed in to you previously. As you know, the Secret Order has the seer pathway in its grasp and possesses powerful tracking abilities, so Hornis and I believed that it would be a risky move to continue keeping the notebook. The value it had presented to us wasn't sufficient for us to take the risk. Since we couldn't wait for your reply, we agreed amongst ourselves to sell the notebook to Welch, who was living on the same street. He enjoyed collecting relics and ancient books, and he could afford to pay a high price for it. As for the subsequent developments, you are already aware of it. This is the first thing that I'd like to explain. As I am writing these words, Hornis is dead. He died due to a heart attack during his sleep. That must be a blessing from God, to prevent him from suffering the outcome of falling into the hands of heretics. I had no choice but to move to somewhere safer, more hidden. I didn't even dare to leave the house. Luckily, the lamb told me that the reason Hornis was being eyed by the heretics wasn't because of the Antigonous family's notebook, nor was his identity exposed. It was just that he had taken in a silly female disciple in the hopes of slowly developing her into one of us. His female disciple had stolen a glance at his secret incantation and tried the magic divination while a Nighthawk heretic was watching. I believe you can pretty much guess the rest of the story, so there is no need for me to describe it. It's a pity that the position of the lamb isn't high enough, so the actual details cannot be determined. From various feedback, it seems the heretics have yet to suspect me. Their investigations came to a halt due to Hornis's sudden death. Therefore, I will return to the streets and plan to borrow a few more journal issues from the Deweyville library to seek out more clues. As a faction that also had the seer pathway in its grasp, the Antigonous family must have had some divinations regarding its decimation. They must have left behind secret treasures that would allow for the revival of the family. There's sufficient reason to believe that the treasure is hidden on the main peak of the Hornis Mountain Range, which is in one of the relics in the nation of the Evernight. Having read that, Klein's pupils constricted rapidly. He nearly dropped the letter. The pathway that the Antigonous family had in its grasp was the seer pathway? What a coincidence! Thunder seemed to boom in Klein's head again and again that left him in a daze. He felt as though it was destiny. The notebook that led to the original Klein's death and indirectly helped me transmigrate originated from the Antigonous family that has the seer pathway in its grasp. The one that eventually made me choose the seer potion was the Emperor Rosel's diary, while Emperor Rosel was biased towards the seer sequence because of the mysterious Meister Zaratul, who was the leader of the Secret Order, which also has the seer pathway in its grasp. This is like a suffocating net, sown by fate. What exactly is lurking behind all of this? Klein held the letter and paced back and forth. He needed to verify the contents with other sources. Yes, the secret order that the Zaratul family controls is pursuing and searching for the belongings left behind by the Antigonous family. If both parties shared the same beyond a sequence, there would be a sufficient reason and motive. Perhaps it is to bridge any missing sequences, obtain rare ingredients for a higher sequence advancement, or covet the other party's accumulated experiences in avoiding the loss of control. Going by this line of thought, it is rather reasonable that the Antigonous family has at least part of the seer sequence chain. Yes, when I was divining for clues pertaining to the clown potion, the images that emerged were mostly related to the Antigonous family. The only exception was the suited clown from the secret order. Therefore, the true meaning behind the symbolism is that each scene carries the possibility of obtaining the clown potion and a clue. However, I didn't understand the crux of the issue and regrettably missed it. With the two corroborating evidence, Klein nearly believed the matters that Sirius had brought up in the letter. He also understood why he constantly heard the word Hornaxis in the murmurs he shouldn't be hearing. The earliest occurrence of this happening was when I first consumed the seer potion. Meanwhile, he guessed that being a survivor of those that made contact with a relic of the Antigonous family and becoming a beyonder of the seer pathway were two necessary conditions to hear the murmurs saying Hornaxis. Is there really a secret treasure buried within the ancient ruins on the main peak of the Hornis Mountain Range by the Antigonous family? No, I can't think about this. Just the notebook alone has killed so many people. Any complete treasure would be even more terrifying. Klein shook his head subconsciously and cast his gaze onto the third piece of paper, which was the last of the letters. Honorable Mr. Z, I hope I can gain your assistance. I believe that you should be sufficiently interested in the treasure too. Until then, I will make myself look like a normal person, a normal lover of history. When the end of days arrives, I will offer all of Tingen's lambs as a sacrifice to God. Humbly, Sirius Arapis. When he finished reading Sirius's letter, Klein had the urge to laugh. Heh, why do I feel like I saved Tingen? What was this guy trying to do? Heretics are truly unbelievable. Who is this Meister Z? He seems like someone in a high position. At the very least, he should be at the same sequence as Captain. Where was Sirius sending the letter to? He didn't write down the address. It seems like that's the cautiousness of a heretic. They wouldn't put the address on until the moment before they sent it out. Right. If the Antigonous family had the potion of the seer pathway in its grasp, then would the clown potion be among the 3 formulas inside the Antigonous family's notebook that Sirius sent? Highly likely. In that instant, Klein seemed to have found clues to the clown potion. Although Sirius didn't bring the formula along with him, it was possible that he had left some form of record at his hideout. He must have also had it in his head, in his memories. Klein looked at the corpse before him and considered the problem of making a dead person speak. It required almost zero consideration, as an idea immediately popped into his head. Mediumship. Spirit mediums could directly communicate with spirits that had yet to disperse. Seers, mystery priors, and others could roughly accomplish the same thing using ritualistic magic. Previously, when he was dealing with the corpse of the suited clown, there were 3 things that had kept Klein from using mediumship. Firstly, he was in a hurry to save the rest. Secondly, he didn't have the ingredients with him. And lastly, he lacked confidence. Thus, he didn't consider the option of mediumship and missed his best chance. When they returned to Blackthorn Security Company, the spirit was mostly gone. Even a spirit medium could only get superficial information. But now, Klein happened to have all the ingredients and tools, and he happened to have the experience of communicating with lingering resentment through the help of dream divination. My only concern about contacting the spirit of a heretic would be being placed in the same situation as Captain's entry into Hanas's dream, where he saw a horrifying existence. However, Captain only remained frail for 2 days, and he wasn't considered severely injured. Yes, I could give it a try. He hesitated for less than 20 seconds before making a decision. He didn't want to miss out on this opportunity. He raised his head, turned around, and cast his gaze toward the spot where the window had shattered. There was a crowd gathered there watching. He took out his identification card and badge before returning to the broken window. He then told the onlookers through the shattered oriel window, "I'm a probationary inspector from the Special Operations Department of the AWA County Police. I have shot the criminal to death. Please take this badge to the nearest police station and tell them to send backup to deal with the follow-up. The rest are to help me cordon off this area. Do not allow anyone to come close, for they might contaminate the scene." "Yes, officer." The librarian that caused Klein the trouble quickly took the badge. When the entire scene was cordoned off and no one could enter the grass patch, Klein returned to the corner and stood by the side of the corpse. He was glad that the innocent crowd couldn't see the dead body, which looked more like a monster than a human. He put down his cane and revolver, then reached into the inner pocket of his windbreaker to take out a metal bottle. He was going to use the techniques of a mediumship ritual with dream divination to make the dead man speak. Chapter 1, 105. Spirit Channeling. Klein twisted open the golden bottle's cap and brought it to his nose. He took a whiff of the stimulating scent that energized him. This was holy night powder, made using slumber flowers, dragon blood grass, deep red sandalwood, mint, and other herbs. Since it was simple to concoct, Klein had made a batch the moment he got the ingredients from the underground market. It was going to be of use now. He poured a little of the holy night powder on his palm and collected himself. His irises turned dark. Next, Klein put away the metal bottle and scattered the powder onto the ground after infusing his spirituality into it. He scattered the powder as he walked, forming a circle around Sirius's corpse. A formless barrier rose, separating them from the outside world. Klein flicked away the remaining holy night powder on his hand and took out the other metal bottles. He sprinkled the Amantha Pure Dew and other liquids in the surrounding area. The ritual he set up was different from the one old Neil used at Ray Bieber's house, since the aim of the ritual was different. For example, old Neil poured the liquids before using the holy night powder. That could create a serene and holy state second only to an actual altar. Klein had used the holy night powder first before pouring the liquids to prevent Sirius's remnant spirituality from being disturbed by the surrounding objects, while still barely managing to have an environment that satisfied the requirements of the ritual. If he had used old Neil's method, the rest of Sirius's spirituality would have been purged, making it impossible to establish a connection. After finishing his preparations, Klein put away the materials and entered a state of cogitation. He recited the Hermes incantations softly. "I pray for the power of the dark night. I pray for the power of the mystery. I pray for the goddess's loving grace. I pray that you'll allow me to communicate with the Heretics' spirituality inside this altar." As the incantations reverberated throughout the sealed space, Klein suddenly felt a massive, terrifying, and mysterious energy descend upon him. His eyes turned completely black, as though he had lost his pupils and the whites of his eyes. Seizing the opportunity, Klein recited a divination statement in his heart, the formula to the clown potion. The formula to the clown potion. As he was reciting the statement, he used cogitation to temporarily enter a dreamlike state. It was a hazy, grey world without a sky or ground. Klein was unusually alert as he observed a transparent, ethereal figure. He extended his right hand and touched the remnants of Sirius's spirit. The scene in front of him changed with a rumble. It was a study table painted with dark red paint. There were 3 candles on a silver candlestand, as well as a blank piece of paper. Sirius had a pen in his hand. He wrote in Loan language, "This is the second formula. Its name in the notebook is Clown." 80 milliliters of pure water, 5 drops of torn apple juice, 7 grams of black-rimmed sunflower powder, 10 grams of golden cloak grass powder, 3 drops of poison hemlock. These are the supplementary ingredients. The main supernatural ingredients are 1 crystal of the single horn of a matured hornaceous gray mountain goat and a complete stalk of a human-faced rose. Sirius seemed to have the clown potion's formula memorized as he quickly finished writing it. He paused for a moment and took a sip of coffee. Then he unwound the silver pendulum around his wrist. He held the pendulum and closed his eyes, muttering terms to himself such as the end of days, peace of mind, hope for the Lord's blessings, and confess. After Sirius finished his prayer, Klein finally saw the pendulum clearly. Under the wound, silver chain was a thumb-sized human figurine. The figurine had a single eye, a trait unique to giants. It was facing down, its legs bound by chains that connected upwards. At that moment, the single eye of the giant suddenly had a faint red glow. Crack! The scene Klein witnessed shattered as his legs buckled, almost causing him to kneel to the ground. Klein felt pain in his head as though he had been struck ruthlessly in the head with a bat. His vision turned blood red as his hands involuntarily reached out to protect his knees. He recovered several seconds later and stood back up. He felt that his spirituality was unusually weak, as if he had heard the murmurings that penetrated his mind once again. But due to his progress in digesting the magic medicine, the adverse reaction calmed down quickly. The hanged giant, the true creator, Sirius and Hornis were both members of the Aurora Order, but the captain saw a huge cross in Hornis's dream. The terrifying being crucified on the cross wasn't the Aurora Order's hanged giant. Klein took 2 deep breaths and waited for his spirituality to slowly recover. The Aurora Order was a secret organization that sprang into existence about 200 to 300 years ago. They worshipped the true creator and symbolized him with the hanged giant. They believed that every human being had divine qualities, and as long as they persevered and made it through the countless trials, they would be able to accumulate enough divine qualities to become angels. According to the internal records of the Nighthawks, the sequence 9 of the Aurora Order was secret suppliant. These Beyonders could sense the existence of mysterious and horrifying beings, and were armed with a decent amount of knowledge regarding sacrifices and some knowledge on ritualistic magic. There was enough evidence to claim that senior secret suppliants experienced distortions of their worldview and lost control easily. Little was known about the Sequence 7, which the Aurora Order had grasped. Sequence 8 was Listener. This was considered quite a terrifying job for a Beyonder. Every listener could listen directly to the whispers of the secret entities. Thus, they frequently came into contact with powerful, distorted, unique abilities. But consequently, if they were unable to advance, it was difficult for them to survive the next 5 years after becoming a listener. Furthermore, the comments the Nighthawks had in the reports were that every listener was a lunatic. Even if they looked normal on the surface, they were always crazy on the inside. The details of the report regarding the Aurora Order flashed through Klein's mind. His initial theory was that Sirius was a secret suppliant. From the description, secret suppliant are as hopeless as seers in battle. That does fit Sirius's actions just now. What happened later was a loss of control brought about by the injury. Yes, Fry once said that every Beyonder would more or less undergo some weird changes after they die. Klein thought as he tapped 4 points on his chest to praise the goddess. After his spirituality recovered slightly, he concluded the ritual with the appropriate procedure and dismantled the wall of spirituality. With a whoosh, a gust of wind blew as Klein forced himself to look at Sirius's corpse. He noticed that there was still an obvious wart on Sirius's mangled face. It was a dark, purple wart, almost black. There seemed to be liquid and a light gleaming within. What kind of transformation was that? Klein rubbed his temples, not daring to touch it. He bent over and retrieved his cane, allowing it to bear his weight. After what had just happened, he knew that Sirius's spirituality had been completely destroyed. Even the spirit medium Daily would be unable to communicate with him. After a while, Klein saw Captain Dunn and his partners, Leonard and Kenley. It seems like your fate is tied to Beyonders and evil forces. In just a few weeks you have come across more supernatural incidents than what we usually see in months, Leonard joked, looking at the corpse on the ground. It might not be a coincidence, Klein added, as he suddenly thought about the red chimney he had seen in his dream Divination, as well as the majestic palace on the main peak of the Hornis Mountain Range and the formless focus on him. He took the opportunity to mention it in passing. Dunn surveyed the surroundings and with his grey eyes trained on Klein asked, "You tried channeling his spirit?" There were still traces of holy night powder and the scent of the essential oils. "Yes," Klein replied truthfully. "I was worried that you would arrive late and that the remains of his spirituality would scatter." "You don't look well. Are you all right?" the short Kenley asked in concern. Klein passed Sirius's undelivered letter to the captain and began from the beginning. "When I went to the underground market to purchase materials for the rituals, I suddenly remembered that Selena had also once gone to the evil dragon bar, and that it was Hornis Vincent that brought her there. This meant that Hornis was a regular there. Thus, I suspected that the person in the portrait, someone who's definitely connected to Hornis, might have gone to the underground market too. I asked the boss Swain about the portrait, and he gave me confirmation. He told me that the man had once tried to buy documents and items related to the Hornis Mountains. That reminded me of the library. I recalled that the librarian had mentioned that someone had just returned the journal issue I wanted to borrow." Leonard stood to the side, listening with a smile. He suddenly interrupted. "And so you brought your identification documents and badge here to flip through the borrowing records?" "Actually, I am very curious. Why would you come into conflict with this man here? Even if it was a direct encounter with your style of doing things, you would have pretended that you didn't know him and would just leave the library. Then you would come to Zootland Street to ask for our help." "Yes, there was no need for you to take the risk. As long as you confirm the target and that he hasn't left Tingen, there would always be a way to find him," Dunn added as he reviewed the letter. Klein immediately said in embarrassment, "The librarian recognized him and shouted for the police to help. There's no way I could have pretended not to hear that." Leonard and Kenley looked at each other. One tried to cover his amusement, while the other turned his head to the side. Dunn nodded, his gaze leaving the letters. "Did you get anything from channeling his spirit?" "I saw a pendulum that took the shape of a hanged giant. I saw a blood-red glow flash in the giant's only eye before I was forced out of the ritual," Klein described honestly. He didn't want to talk about the clown potion for the time being, as he had two considerations. First, if Dunn and the rest were able to find Sirius's hideout and the corresponding records, then it would make no difference if he told them or not, as there would be no additional contributions attributed to him. Second, if Dunn and the rest were unable to find it, he could report it in the future. This way, he would be awarded with another contribution, allowing him to acquire the ingredients needed to concoct a potion. This was a way to obtain double the rewards for a single task, a technique that stemmed from Old Neil's recent teachings. "Aurora Order?" Dunn muttered to himself before he asked some relevant questions. After Klein answered all his questions, he saw the fatigue in Klein's eyes and waved his cane. "Not bad. You foiled a scheme that was targeting Tingen. You can go back and rest. Kenley, bring Old Neil over." After giving out instructions, Dunn smiled bitterly and shook his head. "Before Sequence 6, Beyonders of the Sleepless Pathway lack many supplemental abilities. We can only conduct the simplest of ritualistic magic." "Captain, you mean that from Sequence 6 onwards, a Sleepless Pathway Beyonder would gain improvements in the corresponding aspects?" Klein asked, out of curiosity. "Yes," Dunn confirmed. After leaving the Daffodil Street Library, Klein nearly fell asleep in the carriage on multiple occasions on his way back to Daffodil Street. He lumbered into the house. He then removed his hat and jacket before falling asleep on the sofa. Sometime later, he woke up abruptly, took out his pocket watch, and snapped it open. "Melissa will be back in half an hour, Benson, in 45 minutes. If I don't get up, I'll have to make them wait an hour before we can have dinner." Klein rubbed his forehead as he entered the kitchen. He washed his face with cold water, then took out the oxtail, tomatoes, carrots, and onions he had bought that afternoon. After he prepared the ingredients, he suddenly froze. He had the feeling that his actions just now formed a strange juxtaposition with the incident that afternoon. "I am a man who just saved Tingen," Klein mumbled in amusement. He put on a white apron and got to making dinner. Chapter 106. Artist Klein. After 8 in the evening, in the Moretti family's dining room. As he looked at the shallow soup left in the bowl, Benson raised his hand to cover his mouth, to give a satisfied burp. Although that was our third time eating it, I still find it delicious. The sourness and sweetness of the tomato and the chewy texture of the oxtail blends into a perfect and unique flavor. Klein, I'm sorry that the Blackthorn Security Company caused Tingen City to lose such an outstanding chef. Melissa leaned backwards in her chair and nodded in agreement silently. This is because you have yet to try real cooking. Klein smiled humbly. If we have a chance in the future, let's head to Bonaparte Restaurant on Howes Street for some authentic Intis cuisine, and also to Coastline Restaurant in the Golden Indus Borough for some southern delicacies. These were restaurants that were always covered in the newspapers, where the average cost per person was around £1.50. I like your cooking more, Melissa answered without hesitation. Benson chuckled and changed the topic. But I ultimately feel that there's something lacking from the tomato oxtail soup. Perhaps it shouldn't be eaten with bread. Klein nodded in agreement. It's best complemented with rice. Rice, Melissa muttered with an expression of yearning. Tingen, which was located north, wasn't considered a big city. Besides a few particular restaurants, it was difficult to have any chance of eating rice. To Benson and Melissa, this kind of food only existed in the descriptions of newspapers and textbooks. Looking at his sister's expression, Klein laughed. Wait till we save another 6 months' salary, and we will find a chance to go on vacation in Desi Bay and try the delicacies there. Desi Bay was located in the far south of the Loan Kingdom, and a third of it belonged to Faina Potter Kingdom. It had plenty of sunlight and beautiful scenery, and the paella there was very famous. Before Melissa could share her opinion on saving money, Klein said, "In another 3 months, I should get another raise. By then, we could totally fulfill our desire to travel as well as save money for necessities." Why? Benson and Melissa's attention was redirected as expected. Klein coughed lightly and smiled while explaining, "Due to my professionalism, the police department, which always collaborates with our company, intends to hire me as their part-time history consultant. They would pay me extra, at least £2 a week. If you see me in a police uniform in the future and showing the corresponding police documentation, please don't be shocked. Of course, as you know, the work efficiency in governmental departments is as slow as a 90-year-old lady's footsteps. They still have to go through a lengthy procedure, and they're required to do a thorough inspection of me. Hence, on my off days for the next 2 months, I'll be heading to Coy University quite often to see my mentor and the teaching staff I know to learn more." Seeing the shocked look in his brother and sister's eyes, he paused and said with a strange expression, just like Emperor Roselle said, "One is never too old to learn." Benson maintained a few seconds of silence before saying in a half self-deprecating and half emotional manner, "Is it too late for me to sign up for university? Knowledge really is wealth. And also power," Klein added silently. "Benson, you need Klein's grammar books and his classic literature textbooks," Melissa said out of the blue, stealing the words from Klein's mouth. Benson's expression seemed to change. He gritted his teeth and said, "Klein, pass me those books tonight. Even if all they do is put me to sleep, I am determined to read them for an hour. No, an hour and a half a day. I swear in the name of the goddess, if I can't do it, I will be a curly-haired baboon." A smile immediately plastered across Klein's face. "No problem." The next morning, Klein hung his coat and hat on the clothes rack in the break room. Then he followed Roseanne's instructions and walked to the basement to the duty room outside Chanis Gate. Captain Dunn and members Fry, Seeker, Royale, Leonard and Kenley were all there. As his grey eyes glanced past the newly promoted Nighthawk, Dunn smiled and said, "We have a routine meeting every Thursday to summarize past missions and discuss various challenges. I am a man who has endured the test of many regular meetings as well." Klein lampooned. He found a seat and joked, "Do I need to introduce myself?" Dunn smiled and turned to look at Kenley. "Briefly tell us about the investigation of Sirius Arapus." Kenley was also a Nighthawk, who had been promoted from a member of the civilian staff. He wasn't very tall, his brown hair was quite thick, his body size was average, His muscles were very toned, and he looked like someone who was smart and capable. He thought and said, "With old Neil's help, we found Sirius's secret hideout. There were many books and items at the scene. From them, we can be certain that Sirius was one of the underground members of the secret organization, the Aurora Order. He was also a secret suppliant. There's sufficient evidence to show that he and Hornis Vincent sold the Antigonous family notebook to Welch. Those who don't remember Welch can ask Klein about him. We found valuable items, including 3 sequence potion formulas, which are sequence 9 seer, sequence 8 apprentice, and sequence 8 clown. The subsequent task is to use Sirius's social circle and the letters we found to locate other outer circle members of the Aurora Order. The focus of our search will be directed at the heretic who has infiltrated the police department. Also, people who were in contact with Hornis need to be reinvestigated." Dunn nodded lightly and looked towards Klein. "As you heard just now, we've obtained the clown potion formula, but are unable to determine if it's real. We have to wait for the Holy Cathedral to give us feedback. In the mission relating to the Aurora Order, you have made a crucial contribution. Plus, given that you shot a member of the Secret Order, it won't be long until you accrue enough contributions to be promoted. But I have to remind you that not everyone is like Daly. You have to suppress your desire and wait for 3 years. In order to avoid losing control, you can't allow your mindset to be affected by our discovery of the clown potion formula. Captain, you don't understand how magical it is to act. I have already confirmed the authenticity of the clown potion formula using divination above the grey fog last night." Klein nodded obediently. "I will keep my emotions in check." Then, Seekatron, the quiet midnight poet with white hair and black eyes, said, "We still haven't found any clues regarding Instigator Triss. I suspect that he has already fled from Tingen." After they were done exchanging their new information, Klein left the duty room and found old Neil to continue his mysticism lessons. In the afternoon, he went over to his combat teacher, Gawain, to do basic strength, endurance, and overall coordination training, with the sun still up and bright at 5. Klein took off his training costume, took a quick shower, and changed into his original clothing. He then took the public carriage to Basic Street. He hadn't forgotten about the red chimney that he had seen in his dream divination, nor did he forget about the man that he suspected to be a member of the psychology alchemists who had bought supplementary ingredients for the spectator potion in the underground market. These things would be inconvenient to investigate in his role as a Nighthawk. Number 27, Henry's private detective company. Yup, it's here. Klein found a private detective company according to the newspaper's descriptions. It was said to be trustworthy. He put on a mask, lowered his top hat, and flipped up his collar. He walked up the stairs and came to the company on the 2nd floor. "Knock! Knock! Knock!" He knocked on the door that was half closed. "Please come in," said a voice that seemed to be affected by phlegm. Klein lifted his cane and pushed the door to enter. He saw the detective company using an almost open layout. There were 4 employees sitting at their respective seats partitioned into small cubicles. "Hi, I'm Detective Henry. How may I help you?" A man in a white shirt and black vest greeted him. He held a smoking pipe in his hand, and he had a prominent jawline, blade-like eyebrows, and dark blue eyes that sized up his client. Klein used the collar of his windbreaker to block half of his face as he spoke. "I have 2 matters to entrust to you. How are your rates?" "That depends on the difficulty of the task." Detective Henry retracted his gaze and pointed towards the sofa in the guest area. "Let's talk over there." Klein followed him to the semi-partitioned area and sat on the single-seat sofa. He didn't take off his coat, nor did he take off his hat and mask. He purposely made his voice hoarse and said, "First, I need you to help me find a house with a chimney that looks like this, as well as information on who the owner and current tenant are." As he spoke, he took out a neatly folded paper. When he opened it, there was a chimney with its color noted down and its surrounding scenery. This was the drawing that Klein completed by using the uniqueness of the area above the grey fog and the method of praying to himself. "What a great drawing," Detective Henry complimented subconsciously. He then knitted his eyebrows and said, "This is not complicated, but very tedious. It would require a long time and a large amount of manpower." "I understand." Klein nodded lightly. Detective Henry pondered for a moment and said, £7. The price for this job would be £7. In addition, you have to give me at least 2 weeks. All right. Second, help me find this gentleman and find out his identity. The only thing I know is that he occasionally appears at the evil dragon bar near the harbour borough. And he must not detect any men you send. He is very sensitive, and he has terrifying observational skills. Klein took out the second portrait. He intended to get in touch with a member of the psychology alchemists to see if he could find any valuable information and materials. For example, perhaps a formula that could be exchanged with justice. £3. Such a mission would cost about £3 or £4. Your outstanding drawing skills will help my assistant and I save time, Detective Henry replied skillfully. £10 in total? Klein found the price upsetting. Detective Henry took a puff on his pipe and said, "Yes, and you need to put a deposit of £2. When there's progress, you'll need to pay another £3 to £5. The rest of the payment can be made when the mission is completed. Then I shall come next week to check on your progress." Klein didn't haggle over the price to prevent the observant detective from remembering any of his characteristics. After they signed a standard contract, he took out 2 £1 notes and passed them to the detective. He only had £1 and 17 solely left from his savings. As Detective Henry watched the man wearing a gauze mask and a black windbreaker with its collar raised leave in a hurry, he had a suspicious look in his eyes as he smoked his pipe. Why is he looking for a house that has that kind of chimney? He must be an artist, or at least a professional sketch artist of some sort. In the afternoon, in Viscount Glaint's luxurious mansion, Audrey, with her maidservant in tow, followed etiquette and passed her hand to the host. She looked at him, giving her hand a quick peck. "Your beauty accentuates my salon." Glaint first gave a compliment as usual. Then he lowered his voice and said, "That lady is already here. She's a beyonder and also an author." Chapter 107. Fours. "Author?" Audrey asked casually as she observed Glaint's reaction. Subsequently, she didn't have to mind the presence of her maidservant, Annie, since they chatted about ordinary topics. Glaint straightened his body and chuckled. "Yes, I believe that you have read her works in the past. She wrote the book Stormwind Mountain Villa, which was highly acclaimed for the past 2 months. I enjoyed that book, especially the calm Lady Sissy," Audrey replied with a faint smile. Meanwhile, she was rolling her eyes at her own hypocrisy inwardly. That was because her latest hobby had nothing to do with novels. She had stopped reading Stormwind Mountain Villa a month ago. Her progress stopped at the 1/3 mark. Ever since she joined the Tarot Club and acquainted herself with the powerful Fool and became a real beyonder, she had been immersing herself in mysticism knowledge. She had been systematically learning about psychology and had lost interest in other activities. Smiling, Glaint guided Audrey to a sofa in the hall. "I am sure that Miss Four's wall will leave a good impression on you, for she is just like Stormwind Mountain Villa's Lady Sissy, calm, intellectual, and lazy. Also, my dear Miss Audrey, are you going to play the piano for us later? That is the greatest compliment for a novel and literature." Audrey looked at the side profile of Glaint's face. His expression, tone, and body language all conveyed his intention to flaunt himself. "He wants to use me to show off," Audrey thought to herself, as if she had just met this good friend of hers for the first time. She maintained her elegant smile and said, "My music teacher, Mr. Vicanel the pianist, said that my standards have deteriorated recently and needs more practice." "All right." Glaint was just about wondering what to say when he suddenly saw a lady taking desserts from the long table. "Audrey, this is Miss Four's wall, the author of Stormwind Mountain Villa." Audrey looked over. Miss Four's wall was about 23 years old and 1.65 meters in height. She was wearing a pale yellow dress with frills. Her brown hair was slightly curly. She looked over with her pale blue eyes as Glaint introduced her while wearing a smile that appeared ruminative. Audrey had noticed several small details in the less than 3 seconds of observation. There are faint traces of yellow on Miss Four's fingers. She likes cigarettes. There are obvious calluses on her fingers at spots used to hold a pen, fitting her identity as an author. Her arm movements show that she has decent strength. This is not a quality expected of an author unless she is passionate about exercising. Perhaps she was born like this, or she might have engaged in some other occupation in the past. She displayed her calm, rational, and precise style in Stormwind Mountain Villa. This must be linked to her previous occupation. Her eyes and emotions are relaxed, giving me the feeling that she is looking down on me and Glaint. Is this the psychological superiority a Beyonder has over an ordinary human? If it was a coincidence that Glaint discovered her identity as a Beyonder, then she should feel some anxiety and uneasiness. After all, she is unable to guess his reaction and what he would do next, since the unknown always brings about fear. This indicates that she was the one who voluntarily approached Glaint, having learned about our hobbies. She must be quite confident about what is going to happen next. Why would a Beyonder approach Glaint? Does she need monetary support? Or the Beyonder ingredients stored in the treasury? Or perhaps she needs help with something? At this moment, Glaint was introducing Audrey to Fours. "Madam, this is the Miss Audrey that I mentioned previously, the most sparkling gem in all of Backland. Her father is Count Hall, a trusted aide of His Majesty and respected member of the Cabinet. Good afternoon, Madam Fours. Stormwind Mountain Villa is still seated by my bed to this very day." Audrey adhered to the rules of the aristocracy and curtsied, but she added silently, "That's because I haven't finished reading it, even after a month." Fours returned the niceties simply and said, "Good afternoon, Miss Audrey. Your beauty sure leaves an impression. I think that I already have an idea for my next novel." "Heh," Viscount Glaint said, "that you have exceptional talents in music." They merely exchanged praises as they were in public. After watching Fours continue towards the dining table as she targeted a cream cake, Audrey retracted her gaze and headed to the living room with Glaint. She recalled the details she had seen just now and tried to figure the motives of the woman. She wanted to gain some advantage in future conversations. As she took a step forward, Audrey, who was as calm as an objective spectator, stepped on her dress and nearly fell. At this moment, her personal maidservant, Annie, caught her, allowing her to maintain her grace. "Miss, the unique design of this dress means that you cannot walk too quickly." Annie pulled close to Audrey's ear and reminded her softly, "I know." Audrey nodded in reply, her face flushed red. "I was too absorbed in observing others that I forgot to look at where I was placing my foot," she silently complained in resentment. Audrey met with many other esteemed authors, critics, and musicians for the rest of the salon, always maintaining her sweet, elegant smile. Finally, after her facial muscles began turning sore, she saw Viscount Glaint's signal. She waited for a few minutes and gave the excuse of needing to use the washroom. She lifted her dress and stood up slowly to leave the salon. After confirming that there was no one tailing her, she made her way to the study on the first level and told her maidservant Annie, "I have something to discuss with Glaint. Guard the door for me. Do not let anyone enter." "All right." Annie didn't feel that the request was strange, for she knew that Audrey and Viscount Glaint shared similar hobbies and would often discuss mysticism in a private setting. Audrey entered the study and locked the door. She saw Glaint seated behind the desk while playing with a pen. Fours Wall was standing in front of the bookshelf, nonchalantly flipping through a book. "I'll introduce you both again. Madame Fours, a true Beyonder." Glaint put down his pen and walked over. "Is that so?" Audrey intentionally exaggerated her feelings of doubt. Fours returned the book to its original position and turned around with a smile. "It looks like I have to prove myself." She walked over to the door and extended her right palm, grabbing the handle of the door. Suddenly, Audrey's vision blurred. It was as if she witnessed Madame Fours turn incorporeal as she passed through the door. She was shocked. Concentrating, she realized that Fours was no longer standing in her original position. A few seconds later, the door handle turned. The locked door was opened just like that. Fours Wall smiled as she walked in from the outside. Audrey's maid, Annie, who was not far away, didn't seem to be aware of what had happened. "What a magical ability!" Klein exclaimed. Audrey took in a deep breath and said, "I have no more doubts." At the same time, the ability Fours had displayed allowed Audrey to confirm what her true motives were, since acquiring money or materials would be no trouble for a Beyonder like that. Glint doesn't have any Beyonder guards. Fours wants to use the statuses and resources available to Glint and I to achieve something. Audrey tried her hardest to act as a spectator. Fours chortled and said, "Let us interact with honesty. We do not have much time left. I was once a doctor at a clinic and was given an opportunity to become a Beyonder. That was more than 2 years ago. I hope that you can do something for me, and the reward I will give you is allow you to join the ranks of true Beyonders. I will sell you the formula of a particular sequence potion and its corresponding materials." Upon hearing such a promise, Glint could not help but ask, "What do you want us to do?" "I have a partner who's in jail now awaiting the final verdict. I hope that you can save her, regardless of the methods used," Fours said simply. Audrey frowned. "Madam Fours, the abilities you have demonstrated should be better suited for the task." Fours laughed and shook her head. "No, that is not the case. She cannot pass through the places that I can. I can only go in regularly and chat with her. Also, I think that risking my life to save her is not a good idea. Life is short, but there is much for us to do." Audrey observed Fours' face and body language. She considered her words before asking, "I understand. What crime is your partner being locked up for?" Fours' expression immediately turned a little awkward. "My partner is a very respected person who can make others comply from the bottom of their hearts. She is of good character and kind. Well, it was that the means she used to convince a thug was a little over the top." After handing out the mission, Klein followed his original schedule of mysticism lessons in the morning and combat lessons in the afternoon. The regularity of his life almost made him forget that he was a member of the Nighthawks. The curses of often encountering supernatural incidents seemed to disappear as well. It was Saturday, his turn to guard Chanis Gate. "You can enjoy the coffee I left here, or the black tea in the clerk's office." Dunn surveyed the room with his deep, grey eyes. Klein, who had already given an excuse to his siblings, nodded in joy. "All right, Captain. You sure are a generous gentleman." Dunn laughed. "Those will help you relax. Being tense all the time is not good for your health." He took his hat and cane and walked toward the door. As he was exiting the door, he suddenly turned around and said, "I forgot to remind you, do not open Chanis Gate no matter what you hear, unless it is opened from the inside. Remember, no matter what you hear, no matter what happens." "Captain, that's a little scary." Klein tensed up instantly. He felt the darkness of the basement triumph over the light of the gas lamp.